Where did it go? A massive passenger jet gone without a trace. No mayday, no debris, no answers. 239 lives vanished in the blink of an eye. For years, the world kept searching and questioning. Was it an accident? A hijacking? Something else entirely? This isn't just a plane crash. This is the mystery that shook the world. This is the story of Flight MH370. And you're watching Dark Archives, where real stories are worth remembering. On March 8, 2014, at exactly 12:42 a.m., a Malaysian Airlines flight took off into the night. On board, 227 passengers and 12 crew members, a total of 239 people, all heading from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to Beijing, China. Normally, a Boeing 777 would cover this route in about 6 hours. Most passengers likely settled in for a long, quiet flight, sleeping, watching movies, waiting to land in Beijing the next morning. During this time, the plane was in constant contact with Malaysian air traffic control. Every moment, hundreds of planes take to the skies across the globe. To keep them safe and avoid mid-air collisions, countries rely on sophisticated systems to monitor their airspace. Air traffic control systems are operated by trained professionals, controllers who track and guide aircraft with pinpoint accuracy. They receive live data through radar and communication systems, including flight number, aircraft location, speed, and current altitude. Using this data, the air traffic controller analyzes the situation of each aircraft, then gives clear instructions to the pilot on where to go and how to adjust their course. To prevent overlaps or conflicts in flight paths, the core mission of this system, ensuring smooth, safe air travel, preventing accidents, and protecting the lives of everyone on board. Now, back to our flight. Just 10 minutes after takeoff, Malaysian Air Traffic Control gave the flight permission to ascend to 35,000 feet. This would be the cruising altitude for the remainder of the journey. By 1 a.m., the plane was exactly where it should be, on the correct path, at the correct altitude, on its way to Beijing, China. As the aircraft approached the edge of Malaysian airspace, it was about to enter Vietnamese airspace. At this point, Malaysian controllers contacted their Vietnamese counterparts to formally hand over responsibility for the flight. The Malaysian system then sent a message to the pilot, instructing him that air traffic control would now be handled by Vietnam, and that he should switch to their radio frequency. From that moment on, the plane would be fully under the supervision of the Vietnamese Air Traffic Control Unit. The pilot received the message and confirmed it. He acknowledged the instructions and said he would contact Vietnamese Air Traffic Control. Then he ended the transmission. Unfortunately, things did not go according to plan, because that message was the last transmission ever made by the pilot. The Vietnamese control tower never received a call, never heard a single word, because, simply put, the Malaysian plane vanished. The disappearance from radar meant the aircraft had stopped sending any signals, and that could happen for simple reasons, like a malfunction in the transponder. But it could also mean something far worse, something terrifying, like a fire or a disaster that damaged part of the plane or destroyed it entirely. 20 minutes after the disappearance, around 1:40 a.m., Vietnamese authorities contacted Malaysia. "Where is the plane? It hasn't entered our airspace yet." Panic started to spread, gets the terrifying news, and here's where it gets worse. The plane was supposed to send a message every 30 minutes, an automated signal, but now those signals had stopped completely. No updates, not even the routine ones. That's when everyone realized something is seriously wrong. Both Malaysian and Vietnamese controllers scrambled to reach the plane. They tried every frequency. They even asked nearby aircraft to make contact. Nothing. No response. Not a sound. At that moment, simple technical failure and human error were no longer on the table. Those explanations were now replaced by something darker. Because when every communication system fails, it can only mean one thing: a major failure on board. Maybe a power outage, maybe a fire, maybe an explosion, a catastrophe. The only hope left, before Malaysia Airlines announced the devastating news, was waiting for the plane's scheduled landing time. They waited until the plane's scheduled landing time arrived. Clinging to a tiny glimmer of hope, airline officials in Beijing waited 6 a.m. Maybe, just maybe, the plane had lost contact with Vietnam or China, but it had still managed to complete the flight and would land safely in Beijing. Or maybe it would make an emergency landing at a nearby airport. Maybe it was just a power outage. So they waited and waited and waited. But the plane never arrived in Beijing, and it never landed at any other airport. By 7 a.m., the airline had made the official announcement. At a press conference, they made the terrifying announcement: Flight MH370, a Boeing 777, is missing. A massive search and rescue operation will begin immediately. It will focus on one place, the South China Sea. But why the South China Sea? Because the last known contact with the plane was directly over that area. Everyone assumed the worst. A sudden disaster had brought the plane down there at sea. As the airline faced a family collapse and investigators read out the names of all the passengers on board, they began to wonder what could have caused such a sudden plane to crash. Was it a terrorist attack? A malfunction in the aircraft's control systems? A structural defect? But what no one knew at that moment was this horrific truth: the plane was not at the bottom of the South China Sea, not even close. The plane was cruising at 40,000 feet. The passengers sat quietly, unaware of what was happening. The aircraft was supposed to land in Beijing at 6:30 a.m., but nothing happened. Everyone waited until 7:20 a.m. Still, no sign of the plane. We thought it had crashed into the South China Sea. We searched and found nothing. Only later did we realize a terrifying truth. The plane was still in the sky, still flying, and the passengers, whose families were mourning on the ground, might still be alive in the air. The fuel on board allowed Flight MH370 to keep flying for 2 more hours after its expected landing time, which means by 9 a.m. on that same morning, it had either landed somewhere or crashed deliberately or due to running out of fuel. So the real question became, where is the plane? Where did it go? That single question launched a global mystery, one that hasn't been solved even 10 years later. Imagine that. A modern jetliner took off and was never found. And as panic spread across the world, one question remained: where did it crash? But the deeper mystery wasn't about where it went down. The real puzzle was the path it took. And on March 9th, a full day after the disappearance, the first clues finally began to emerge. Malaysian officials suddenly redirected the search toward the Andaman Sea near Indonesia. Wait, what? Indonesia? Wasn't the plane headed to China? Didn't it pass over Vietnam? What does Indonesia have to do with anything? The Andaman Sea has no connection to the planned route. But then, 1 week later, the Prime Minister of Malaysia made a shocking announcement. He revealed that military radar systems had picked up flight MH370 right after it disappeared from civilian radar. The plane had made a sharp turn, a full U-turn, then flew across the Strait of Malacca. It kept flying in the complete opposite direction. But if the military saw it, why didn't they sound the alarm? Didn't they realize it was the missing plane that the world was desperately looking for? Well, here's the thing. Military radars work a little differently. Unlike air traffic control systems, military radar doesn't receive signals from the aircraft. It's not a communication system. It's a traditional radar based on radio waves. Its biggest strength? It can detect any flying object, even a flock of birds. Nothing escapes it. Even if the plane's power went out, even if its transponders failed, the radar would still see it. So, mystery solved? Not quite. You see, this kind of radar has a tiny flaw. It can't tell you what it's seeing. No ID, no altitude, no speed. Just a moving dot on a screen. But surely, if any unknown object enters the country's airspace, the military would respond, right? They'd scramble jets, investigate, raise the alarm. But in our case, with flight MH370, something strange happened, a bizarre coincidence. Yes, the plane veered off course, but it didn't leave Malaysian airspace. In fact, it turned in a way that kept it right where it was authorized to be. So even if the radar caught this sharp maneuver, it would seem harmless. Just a plane returning to base. A possible emergency, perhaps? After all, the aircraft was still within the approved flight zone. Why panic? But then, something else? The path of this maneuver? It was heading straight toward Thai airspace, a zone where the aircraft had no clearance to enter. If it did, the Thai military could have mistaken it for a threat. It could have been shot down. But the pilot, he made a turn, a sharp manual turn, one that no autopilot system would ever perform. This was human intervention, a deliberate move. He steered the aircraft again just enough to avoid Thai airspace too. Instead of crossing into another country, the aircraft kept dancing along the edges, staying hidden in plain sight. Until finally, it vanished from the edge of Malaysia's military radar. That was the last trace. And with that final turn, everything changed. This flight wasn't lost, it was hiding. And the question was no longer what happened, but rather, who was flying that plane and why? At first, investigators thought it might be a technical failure, an act of terror, or maybe even a fire on board. But now, everything changed. This was no accident. The Malaysian plane was flying with a deliberate strategy. Someone inside that cockpit was planning something bold, something calculated, and maybe something insane. How do we know? Because the aircraft's communication systems didn't just fail. They went dark exactly at the moment the plane was about to cross into another country's airspace, a moment so perfectly timed that each country assumed the other was tracking the plane. Coincidence? Number, this was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Right after the systems cut out, a sudden, sharp U-turn. Precise, tactical, executed so well no one could predict the path. And as the plane kept twisting through the sky, it stayed hidden just within Malaysian airspace, carefully avoiding foreign radars, until the very last Malaysian military radar lost it. Gone. Now the question wasn't what happened, but rather, what was this person trying to do? What insane mission was this pilot on? But that was only the beginning. Whoever was in control of flight MH370 didn't just disappear. They outmaneuvered airspace. They slipped past radars. They made the whole world blind. Now, the question isn't just how, it's why. And this is where our story pauses, because in part 2, we dive into the global manhunt, the deep sea searches, the theories that got closer than anyone expected, and the one clue that changed everything. So, what do you think happened to Flight MH370? Was it a hijacking, a mission, or something even darker? Drop your theory in the comments. Like if you're gripped by this mystery, and subscribe so you don't miss the truth still unfolding, because this was only the first descent, and there are still stories waiting in the dark archives.